this wonderful modern time, we have the luxury of ordering just about any food we want for delivery. It's easy to get anything from pizza to a chicken sandwich. On the flip side, we can take jobs as delivery drivers and make a few bucks on the side. It's easy work, and when you're a single mother like me, any extra income is good income. A few weeks ago, I delivered some food to a nice suburban community. It was one of those neighborhoods you'd see on a Disney Channel show. Nice houses, picket fences, you know the neighborhoods I'm talking about. And like all the deliveries I make, I'm supposed to take a picture of the food at the front door. Think of it as like an insurance policy in case the food is at the wrong house or stolen or something weird happens. I place the food in front of the door, on top of the small staircase that leads to the door. I took a few steps back and took a picture of it. After taking the picture, I was walking back to my car when I was confronted by an extremely angry and enraged woman who came out from the house across the street. I asked her what her problem was, and she just kept screaming at me, saying that it was private property and that I was trespassing. I tried explaining one time to the woman what I did and why I took the picture, and it did not compute in her tiny little brain. After being continuously cut off every time I tried to speak, I decided to just get into my car and drive away. I tried being nice, but clearly this woman was insane. I got inside my car and was checking my phone for another delivery. The woman started to bang on the hood of my car, causing me to jump from being startled. I got out of the car aggressively to see if there was any damage, and she ran back to her house. There was no damage, but I was so done with this delivery and I decided to just call it a night. I ended up driving home and spending the evening with my daughter. We ate dinner, played some games, and watched a movie together. I put her to bed and started binge-watching one of my favorite shows, and I would have guessed that it was around midnight when I heard someone knocking at my front door, knocking rather aggressively, I might add. I couldn't believe what I was looking at through the peephole in the door. It was the crazy woman from the delivery earlier in the day. I didn't answer. I didn't even say anything. I just kept watching this woman, trying to figure out what she was doing at my house. She had to have followed me home, which was already insanely creepy, and while I was watching her, she went over to the walkway that led to my front door. From the driveway, I have this path of little stones that leads to the front door. It's not like big slabs of pavement, but rather small stones that almost fit together like a mosaic. The woman grabbed one of the stones, roughly the size of an average dinner plate, and put it behind her back. She started to knock on the door again, still concealing the stone behind her back. And this is where things get very weird. I didn't answer the door, but I shouted to her that I had called the police. And this must have scared her because she threw the stone at my house and ran away. I did end up calling the police and reporting what happened. They followed up, but nothing really came of it, and that was the end of the story until recently. If that was all that happened, that would be scary enough, not knowing what she wanted from me and her showing up in the middle of the night. But things got much worse. About a week after the incident, I saw the woman at the grocery store. No confrontation or anything like that, but then I saw her several other times just driving. Again, no confrontation or anything else. I wanted to say it was just a coincidence, but it almost felt a little too weird. I have a friend who is married to a cop, and I talked to him about it. I explained that something felt off, but it's possible that it was just pure chance that I kept noticing her, and he agreed. He basically said that because I'm aware of this woman, I'm subconsciously picking her out of the crowd in our town. I didn't like that answer, but I guess technically he was right. It is a pretty smallish town after all. And this brings me to about a week ago as of me writing this account. I just got my daughter on the bus and I was outside pulling some weeds. While I was on the ground, I could feel someone standing over me. I turned around, and it was that woman. The same damn woman from that stupid delivery. I was completely vulnerable in that position and I didn't know what to do. And she said in a sort of soft but angry voice, "You're a monster for calling the cops. You're a trespasser." I noticed that she had one of my stones again, and without thinking, flight mode kicked in, and I got up and ran as fast as I could. She actually tried hitting me with a stone, but she missed. I ran inside and locked the door, I called the police and told them that she was back and trying to hit me with a rock. The police showed up, and this time, they arrested that crazy woman. It turns out that that woman had some pre-existing history of mental health. I'm not exactly sure what it was. And because this is so fresh, I don't exactly know what happened to her. I saw her get taken away in the back of a squad car because she was still at my house when the police came. And I just hope this nightmare is over. At least for now, it seems to be over. I just hope that she gets the help that she needs and that I never have to see her crazy face again. In my early 20s, I had a knack for spending more money than I could afford. When I got my first real taste of making money, it's not an understatement to say that I was reckless. One of the first things I did was get a new car with extremely high payments. Instead of leasing a smaller, cheaper car, I decided that I was going to buy a BMW. It's not a top-of-the-line one, but still a BMW, and my payments were over $600 a month, which may not seem like a lot for some people, but for me, it was crippling. I barely made enough money to pay my bills, and I still lived with my parents at the time, and so I found myself doing all sorts of tasks for friends and family members to make some extra money. I regularly watched my friend Dom's dog. Dom had to go out of state every other weekend for his job, and since he didn't have a wife or girlfriend, he had me as his dog sitter. And I did this for about 6 months and honestly loved the job. He lived in a nice and quiet neighborhood. The dog, Willard, was a golden retriever and was such a good dog, not to mention easy to care for. And these bi-monthly trips to Dom's were something I looked forward to. But like most good things in the world, it eventually came to an end. I'm sorry about the pessimistic attitude, but the last time I watched Willard, the evening started like every other weekend dog-sitter trip. We'd play in the yard for a while, go for a walk, and then wind down at around 9 p.m. One of the reasons why Dom trusted me was because he knew I could never have people over or anything like that because I would work early in the mornings on the weekends. Usually I would be asleep around 10, but on this Saturday night, I was invested in a movie that ended a little after 11. The movie was Inception, just in case you were wondering. And after the movie, I let Willard out while I got myself ready for bed. I always felt weird about sleeping in Dom's bedroom, so I would usually sleep on the couch with the dog. Just as I was getting comfortable, the doorbell rang. I looked at the clock and it was about 11:16 p.m. My mind immediately went to someone in Dom's family. I couldn't imagine anybody else ringing the doorbell in his neighborhood at this hour, and I rushed to the door, and standing on the other side was a young man, most likely in his early 20s like me. He looked clean-cut and didn't have a threatening presence about him, and I opened the front door but kept the outer screen door shut and locked. And talking through the screen, I asked him if I could help him with something, and he didn't seem weird or sketchy, and in a very confident voice he said to me, "Hey man, I got the food you ordered." And 2 things I feel like I need to mention here. 1, this was before all the food ordering apps, so your food never just got dropped off at the door. You had to physically go and pay for the food at the door and have an interaction with the delivery driver. And 2, you're probably assuming that Willard is like most dogs and that she's barking like crazy at someone ringing the doorbell. Well, she isn't like most dogs. Not only did she not bark, but she stayed on the living room couch the entire time I had an interaction with that delivery driver. I was kind of annoyed by this more than anything. I definitely wasn't scared. I mean, why would I be? I had no reason to believe that this was anything other than just some mistake. I explained to the guy that he had the wrong address and that I didn't order any food. We had a quick back and forth, and then we figured out that the delivery was for a different address, and he accidentally went to the wrong house. The guy started to apologize, and I told him not to worry. While he was apologizing, I noticed that his car was filled with 3 other people, 2 in the back and 1 in the passenger seat. I thought that was pretty weird. I never noticed delivery drivers have anyone else in the car with them, let alone an entire carload of people. We finally wrapped up our conversation and locked the door. I made my way back to the living room and tried to get myself comfortable again, and I was a little annoyed, but I understood accidents do happen. Not 2 minutes later, the doorbell starts ringing like crazy. You know that annoying sound of the bell just ringing non-stop? Well, I jumped up and ran to the door. It was the delivery driver, and now he looked a little bit more panicked. I didn't open the front door but shouted through the window beside the door. I asked what he wanted, and he told me that he accidentally hit my car in the driveway while he was trying to leave. And before I could answer, he put his head down and said in an almost ashamed voice, "I'm sorry, man, but it looks like there's a little damage. I hate to bother you, but I think you should take a look." Now I was furious. I opened the front door and started following the delivery driver down the driveway toward my car. I didn't even put shoes on. Several feet from the car, I noticed something strange, though. His car, which was filled with passengers just a few minutes ago, was now empty. I stopped abruptly, and the delivery driver told me to keep going, and that the damage was on the other side of the car. It may have taken a while, but finally I started to get the feeling that something just wasn't right. I told him that I wanted to go back inside and grab my shoes. I started to walk back to the door, trying to pretend that everything was fine, and just a few steps into my walk back, I heard a noise to my right. From the brush on the side of Dom's house, 2 people emerged wearing hoods. I started to jog towards the front door. On the other side of the house, another person started to run full pelt at me, and at that point I began sprinting toward the door. I was inches from the house, and one of the men tried to tackle me. Thankfully, he was just far enough away that he made contact with my ankle, but it wasn't enough to trip me up. I freaked out, got inside, and locked the door behind me. That tackler was immediately at the front door, banging and trying to open it. I was able to get a glimpse of the man who tried tackling me. He looked like he was tan, a skinny guy with a buzzed hair. He had a scruffy beard and a tattoo of some tiger on his neck. I grabbed my phone and called the police right away. I stared out the window while I was speaking with the dispatcher, and I saw all 4 of them standing near my car. I told dispatch what had happened and gave them a very detailed description of the delivery driver and the tiger tattoo man, and I watched all 4 men get into the car and drive away. I was able to tell the police that it was a red Honda Civic, and the police eventually showed up and took my entire statement. But what's frustrating for me is that even with all the details I gave the police, they never caught any of these dudes. But what's most frustrating is that I have no idea why I was targeted. I didn't recognize these guys, and when I told Dom about the incident, the appearance didn't sound familiar to him either. It's scary what can happen out there in the world when you least expect it. A few years ago, while I was in college, I would deliver pizzas on my off days from school to make some extra cash. The shop I worked at was in a busy town. You would think the lunchtime shift would be worse than the dinner rush, but I made substantially more money delivering during lunch, mostly because it would usually be large businesses ordering pizzas for their company, and most of the time they would tip nicely. One afternoon, we got an order from some new insurance company that I had never heard of before, which for the record is not really a red flag. Once I started delivering pizzas to businesses during lunch, I found out that I didn't know most companies that I delivered to. And trust me when I say, a lot of these places could use some better marketing, but that's another story for another day. So, I took the order and plugged the address into my GPS. It wasn't far from the shop. The company had an office in a building that had been recently renovated, and right in the center of town was the small business park complex that was filled with old buildings and offices. It was only in the last few years that most of the spaces had been rented out. During the time the story took place, there was still a lot of available spaces in these buildings, and this wasn't the first time I delivered to this business complex, but it was the first time I delivered to this specific building of the complex. It was toward the back of the complex, and there was probably 10 cars in this massive parking lot. I walked inside the building, and I swear I felt like I was in an episode of The Walking Dead or something. It was just so creepy. It was quiet in a very desolate lobby. It had the vibe of an abandoned mall, and what made it more creepy was just the overall atmosphere of the interior of the building. It was dim inside, almost uncomfortably so. There wasn't a person in sight. The aesthetic of the place was all this tile that looked like it was supposed to be marble. There was eerie elevator music playing in the background that echoed slightly because of the lack of anything inside this big open space. And once inside, you walk into the center of the building and into a large atrium where you're able to look up and see all the floors. I can't remember exactly, but I'm going to say the building was 6 floors. I looked at my order form and I couldn't read my own handwriting. I tried to recall and I thought the woman on the phone said that it was on the 5th floor. I was purely guessing because the lobby didn't have any type of secretary or directory. I took the elevator to the 5th floor, still listening to the creepy elevator jazz that seems to be playing everywhere in this damn building. The elevator opened to a small walkway where I was able to look over the railing and down the atrium where I had just been standing a minute ago. I could go left or right out of the elevator and both directions seemed to lead really nowhere. And by that I mean the halls were dark and I couldn't see any light protruding from the shut doors that lined the halls. Since I'm left-handed, I always opted to go left when I'm faced with these types of choices. A few steps down the hall, the lights above my head turned on and I felt a little relief. The lights in the hallway were motion censored, which made me feel better about the dark halls. However, I kept walking down the hall and every office appeared to be shut and vacant. After a minute or two, I decided to do what I should have done in the first place and just call the company that placed the order. It rang once, and then I hung up the phone because I heard someone shout, "Hey," from the end of the hall. I looked up and a man with a sweatshirt was waving me down to an office at the end of the hall. He said in a very shaky voice, "Them pizzas for me?" And without thinking, I just nodded and said, "If you ordered 5 large pizzas, then I'm your guy." The man laughed and I started walking toward him. As I was getting closer to the guy, I noticed that the room behind him was completely dark. The door was cracked, but there was a small window on the side of the door and it appeared that the lights were off. I stopped about 6 feet away from the man and cautiously said, "Are you sure you ordered 5 pizzas? It looks pretty closed up behind you." The man nodded and said, "Oh yeah, everyone is in the back conference room. I like to turn the lights off to save power." I tried not to judge a book by its cover, but this man did not give off the vibe that he sold insurance. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt and jeans, and from what I could see in the shadows, his skin and teeth just looked disgusting. And against my better judgment, I followed him to the door, and when I was in the doorway, I knew I messed up. I looked inside the office and saw that it was empty and a completely vacant room. Before I could react, the man slammed the door in my face, knocking me and the pizzas over. I got up quickly, a little disoriented, and as I got to my feet, the man grabbed some 2x4 or some other large wooden piece from behind the door and just absolutely rocked me in the face with it. I was still conscious, but I was seeing stars for sure. I pretended to be unconscious, which I know may seem like a coward's move, but I didn't want that man to continue beating me, and I thought in the moment it was a good idea. I could not think straight, though. After all, I had no idea if the man had a weapon beyond that, or if there were other people inside that could potentially attack me if I started fighting back. While I was on the ground, the man starts to rummage through my stuff. He took my wallet, ripped off my gold chain from around my neck, and I could hear him running away. While on the ground, I could hear my phone vibrating from my left side. I must have dropped my phone when I dropped the pizzas. Otherwise, I'm sure this man could have taken that as well. I crawled over and grabbed my phone. It was the number that ordered the pizzas. I didn't answer it because I was convinced at this point that this was all some setup and that if I answered the phone, they would summon me to another part of the building where I would just get jumped again. I ended up staying on the ground and called the police, who did thankfully show up very quickly. While I was waiting, the number kept calling me, and I finally answered, and it was a kind young woman asking about the pizzas since they'd been waiting for about an hour at this point. I get the correct floor and office number from the woman, which was floor number 4, and went to the office with that police officer. As it turns out, this was a real office and a real order, and after a little initial investigation, it turns out the man who jumped me was just some homeless guy who was probably squatting in the empty offices. He saw me and just took an opportunity to strike instead of hiding. The bad news is, they never caught who did it. Unfortunately, this type of crime happens a lot in my hometown, and it's hard to determine who jumped someone based on a very little description and evidence. But there is good news, though. The company that placed the order felt so bad they ended up giving me a huge tip for my troubles. Not only that, but after the attack took place, the company installed a fob for the entrance and a security guard at the front door. And to my knowledge, this man was the last squatter that building ever had. Has anyone else gone through an addiction to DoorDash and Grubhub? My husband and I went through a phase where we were extremely busy and found ourselves using a delivery service a few times a week. This particular week, I think this was our third time ordering. We just got done with work and it was already 7 p.m. and we just didn't feel like cooking. We usually have good experiences with delivery services. Once in a while, we'll get a crap delivery person who just kind of throws the food around or the occasional canceled order. But on this particular night, my husband and I chose to splurge. We each ordered 3 courses from a pretty pricey restaurant, but also knew that we'd have leftovers for at least a few days. In the hopes that the food would arrive quickly and safely, we put a very large tip on the order. The delivery person, Rachel, seems to be courteous and prompt, letting us know each step of the way until our order arrives. The food arrived perfectly, and Rachel thanked us for the generous tip to let us know that it meant a lot. We were feeling good and getting the food ready and throwing on a movie to have a little at-home date night. We started putting food on our plates and heard a knock at the door. We both kind of looked at each other and then made our way towards the front door. My husband swung open the door, and what once was a smiling and bubbly delivery person was now at our door expressionless and white as a ghost. Rachel looks up at us and says softly, "Can I please come in? I think there's someone in my car." My husband, who always assumes the worst, is super protective and says no. He never ever lets strangers inside and has read and seen too many things where a good Samaritan lets someone in their house or helps them on the side of the road and you're just set up for some trap. He has said to me multiple times, as soon as you open the door for a stranger and let them in, it's already too late. After a minute or two of pleading with my husband, he agreed that this tiny girl wasn't a threat and we would let her in and lock the door right after. We motioned for Rachel to come in and we could tell that she was thankful but starting to get a little bit hysterical. We phoned the police and let them know what was going on and asked if they could send someone out. They let us know that they would send someone as soon as they could, and we sat with Rachel and tried to calm her down and let her know that she was safe now. We weren't going to let anyone in the house and the cops would check her car and the surrounding area, I'm sure of it. As we waited for the police, now in a mostly awkward silence, my husband noticed a few of our motion lights beginning to turn on. First, we saw one go off on the side of the house, followed by one going off in the backyard just a few moments later. Trying not to cause any panic, but definitely moving with some speed, my husband was darting around the house, making sure that all the windows and doors were locked. I knew they were because unless I specifically opened them, my husband always keeps everything closed and locked, and after he checked all of the locks, he starts to look through the blinds to see if there was anybody on the property illuminated by the motion lights. My husband thought that he saw something by the trees and bushes towards the northwest corner of our yard. He couldn't make it out, but said it looked like eyes were glowing from one of the openings. He told me to go back into the living room with Rachel and he would keep an eye on things. As I was sitting with Rachel, I heard what sounded like nails on a chalkboard, or the only other way to describe it is someone going down a water slide with no water, the kind of dry screeching sound that you might hear there. I went to tell my husband, but he was already hot on the trail, feeling like he had heard tapping on the windows in the dining room. My husband went to the windows where I thought that I had heard the noise coming from and lunged back. He said that he saw a set of eyes pressed up against the glass. Thankfully, the next sound we heard and the image we saw were the flashing lights and sirens of police cars. The police arrive and search the inside and outside of our house thoroughly. They let us know no one is inside, and also no one is inside Rachel's car, even though both of her back doors were completely wide open. Just as they were about to finish the search, they found someone lying underneath our back deck, trying to hide. The officers corral him back down to the ground and get cuffs on him to bring him back to the squad car. We then have to give additional statements and go through some information before they let Rachel know that they will have someone follow her home and escort her into her house. The main officer at the scene also let us know that he would leave someone outside patrolling for at least an hour, and we could request it to be longer if we felt uncomfortable. We were all understandably shaken up by the ordeal and just wanted it to come to an end. My husband and I ended up eating a few bites of our dinner and went to bed shortly after. I don't think I got a minute of sleep that night, though. I felt like our privacy and safety were violated, and also felt so bad for poor Rachel, who I'm sure also had a sleepless night. I'm glad everyone was okay, including the police officers, that nothing more violent or sinister happened that night. And it's safe to say, if we order out, we just go pick up the food now and haven't used a food delivery service app since. Not long ago, I was living with my two friends. I had been single for several years and wasn't even dating at the time. Both of my friends had serious girlfriends, which usually made me feel worse about being the only one without a significant other. One weekend, both couples went away for the weekend and I was alone at the house. Usually it didn't bother me that much, but for some reason, this weekend I was really sad about being single. I was depressed and low and was feeling trapped in my head. I decided to do the one thing that made me happy at the time, and that was eat an entire buffalo chicken wing pizza. My plan for Saturday night was to eat my grief and sorrows away. I ordered my pizza, and 40 minutes later there was a knock at the door. When I went to grab my pizza, I was instantly annoyed. The delivery driver was one of my roommate's friends. Well, friend is a strong word. He was a semi-decent acquaintance of my roommate, and I don't actually know what his real name is. Everybody just called him Z. He was that sketchy guy that every friend group knows. He always showed up at parties with questionable people around him, and he was always in trouble with the cops for something. This guy had a brush with the law for just about everything you can think of on a minor scale. Z was smiling when I opened the door, but the smile faded away when he saw that it was me. He asked if my roommate was home so he could say what's up, and I explained to him that he was out of town and it was just me for the weekend. Z nodded a little bit at the front door, and he tried making some small talk with me, but I was very dismissive and kind of short with him. While he was talking, I noticed that he was looking past me, into the house. It was a very weird interaction, but then again, Z is a weird guy, so I didn't think much about it. I rudely said bye and just shut the door on him. I wasn't in the best mode to begin with. I didn't like Z, and more than anything else in the world, I just wanted to eat my pizza. I eventually ate the entire pizza and spent several hours playing my Xbox. A little after 1 in the morning, I thought I heard a noise coming from outside of the house. I was in my bedroom, which was on the driveway side of the house, and I thought that I could hear the sound of movement or shuffling coming from outside. I looked out the window and I didn't see anything. I assumed it was my mind just messing with me since I wasn't in a great head state. I tried getting back into my game, but after I heard the noise, I just had that nasty pit in my stomach, and it wasn't from the pizza. It was just the feeling that something wasn't right. I went into the kitchen to get something to drink, and I could hear noises coming from the back of the house now. This time, I knew it wasn't my mind. I could clearly hear movement and shuffling coming from the backyard. I gingerly walked to the back of the house, which is where my one roommate's bedroom is located. His door was closed, but I felt like I could hear something behind it. I put my ear to the door and it was clear as day. Something was going on in that room, and I knew my roommate wasn't home. I opened the door, and like a deer in headlights, Z and I assumed his girlfriend were trying to, and nearly successfully, breaking into my roommate's bedroom window. I yelled at him, called him out, and Z, who at this point has completely crawled through the window, was putting his hand up in a defensive position and telling me to calm down. Z looked calm, but the girl he was with looked like a ghost. Z tried telling me that my roommate said it was okay for them to stop by. They were just trying to borrow a DVD. When I asked him why he didn't use the front door, he said that he didn't want to bother me. All while this conversation was happening, Z seemed to be inching closer to me, and his lady friend was slowly moving behind me. I didn't like what was happening, so as Z inched closer to me, I started to inch closer to the door. I looked up at one point and I saw him slowly reach behind his back, and that's when I turned around to run for the door, and the girl was standing in the doorway. Without thinking, I pushed her down and ran to my bedroom. I slammed the door, and Z started pounding on it. He was pleading with me that he was just there to borrow some stuff, all the while violently pounding on my door. I shouted that I called the police and that they would be here any minute. I didn't actually call the police by that point, but I just wanted to see his reaction. He started to curse at me under his breath, and then the pounding stopped. A few seconds later, I saw out of the window him and the girl running down the street. Even though it was late, I called my roommate and asked if he told Z it was okay to borrow some DVDs. My roommate was confused and said that he absolutely did not tell Z that he could borrow anything, and that's when I called the police. It wasn't long after the police apprehended Z for attempted break-in, and that night messed me up. I can't go to sleep now unless I check and make sure every door and window is locked, and as for Z, I'm not really sure what happened to him. After that night, he stopped coming around, and I never saw him at parties again. My roommate finally cut ties with him. I'm still terrified that one night he'll come back for me since I was the one who ratted him out to the police. I can only hope that he doesn't hold a grudge, and I really don't feel very good about that. As many people out there may know, being broke may cause you to do some stupid things, or have a major lack of judgment. That's what happened to me last year. I started using one of those apps to deliver food to make some extra money. I didn't have a ton of friends, and this was a great distraction for me. I throw on some podcasts and deliver food. Mindless and easy work. Most of the time I didn't even have to interact with other people, which was a major perk for me. I would deliver food all over town. Nice areas and not so nice areas. One night I had to deliver food to this large building that had several apartments on the inside. If anybody out there is old enough to remember the show Hey Arnold, it was kind of like that. Just a big house where a bunch of people basically were renting out a room. The building was in a rundown part of town though, but hey, that's part of the job. This specific order was going to one of the tenants named Roxanne, who lived in the basement of the building. When inside the app, you can leave special instructions such as, please leave the food at the door, and most people just leave that for the instructions. Not this Roxanne person, though. She left me multiple messages through the app leaving me further instructions. She said, please enter the side door on the right side of the building. Go right and head down the stairs. You'll be in a small little mudroom. You'll see a door with the number 6 on it. Knock 3 times. Okay, so I guess the instructions were normal and honestly pretty helpful, other than the knock 3 times part being kind of weird. But I have received much weirder instructions than that in the past, believe it or not. I noticed that she didn't tip, but she left me another message saying that she would tip with cash when I arrived with the food, which was great for me. I arrived with her food and followed her instructions, which were spot on. I entered the door on the side of the building and went down into this small dungeon-looking room with a washer and dryer, and right there in the basement was a door with the number 6 on it. Everything seemed legitimate so far. The basement smelled terrible, though. The building looked like it was going to fall over at any second, but everyone has to live somewhere, I suppose. I approached the door, and just as the instructions said, I knocked 3 times. 3 very hard knocks. Almost immediately I got a message on the app telling me to please come inside and bring the food to the kitchen. She said that she was in the kitchen with her purse and she couldn't move very well. It would be helpful for her if I brought the food right to her and then she would tip me there. Now in written context, in hindsight, this seems ridiculous, but as it was happening in real time, I really didn't think it was a dangerous or really anything to be scared about situation. Like I said, I received much weirder instructions, so for me to come inside and drop the food off, it just didn't set off any alarms in my head. I was more annoyed that it was taking so long, and so, without thinking, I slowly opened the door to the basement apartment. It was a very dark room and it smelled horrible inside. The overwhelming smell of body odor almost made me audibly gag. I didn't enter right away, though. When I say it was dark, I mean it was pitch black inside the room other than some dim light coming from the end of what looked like a hallway. I assumed that's where the kitchen was. I didn't completely enter yet, but I just wiggled toward the door a little more. Now I started to hear the faint alarm bells going off in my head, though, but not enough for me to turn around and hightail it out of there quite yet. Remember, the first thing I said in the story was that sometimes being broke causes a major lack of judgment. Well, this was one of those moments I'm referring to. I started to take a step inside the apartment, and when one foot was barely in the door, I heard some creepy voice from the right side that did not sound like a woman, and it said, "Come on in." Thankfully, the creepy voice made me freeze because according to Roxanne, she was in the kitchen, so why would someone be to the right of the door? I still had one foot out in the mudroom, and it's a good thing I did. As I stood there, someone tried to shut the door, but thankfully I was able to stop the door with my foot. I couldn't see the person, but I could smell them, and I could hear their heavy breathing. I threw the bag of food at the person's head and ran as fast as I could. I could hear the door slamming behind me, and I just never looked back. I didn't care about that tip, I just wanted to live. Once I got back to my car, I called the authorities and reported this incident. I told them exactly what happened, and honestly, the cop treated me like I was just some stupid, hysterical kid. It just seemed like I was not being taken seriously. The cops did follow up, and unfortunately, it didn't seem like they did anything. According to police, technically no crime had been committed, and since I couldn't prove that they were trying to forcibly shut me inside the apartment, the police told me it was just better that I let it go. The one officer told me that if delivering food was too scary for me, then maybe I should look for another line of work. I don't know. Maybe this was just a weird interaction that I mistook for something threatening. I will say this, though. I don't know how many non-threatening interactions involve someone trying to shut the door while you're fighting to stay on the other side. I'm just saying. A few years ago, I moved to a new town to finish up my degree and to start an internship program. Even though the program paid a little bit, it wasn't enough to survive. Even though I didn't know the area that well, I decided to start delivering pizzas on the weekends since my roommate's family owned a pizza shop. My thought process was that while I was driving around on the weekends delivering pizza, I could listen to my lectures in the car. And for the most part, this worked. I didn't mind driving around, and my roommate's father was such a great boss, and he was a very accommodating person. One night, I had to deliver a pizza to some house that was way off the beaten path. It was only about 20 minutes from the shop, but it was 20 minutes in a direction of nothingness. After driving that way for a few minutes, it turns into nothing but dark, winding roads with little signs of life. It looks like a horror movie out in these parts of town. With all the turns and lack of light, it felt like I was in the middle of nowhere, even though I really wasn't that far away from the shop. When I was 5 minutes away from my destination, the GPS was struggling to maintain its signal, though. I did end up getting a little lost, but thankfully the GPS was able to keep me on course just long enough to find the house that I was delivering the pizza to. It was a little later than expected, but not egregiously late. When I pulled up, he came out of his run-down house, angry, and shouting about his pizza. When I got out of the car and started to apologize, his tune changed quickly. I hate to assume this, but I think it was because I'm a girl and he changed his tune, just because he attempted to start talking to me with this very sweet man voice and using a lot of words like honey and sweetie. It just felt very weird and creepy, though. He went from screaming and cussing me out to telling me everything would be all right, sweetie. I just smiled and gave the man his pizza. He smiled and didn't walk back inside yet. He just stood there in the driveway holding his pizza box. I got back in my car and was trying to plug anything into my GPS, but of course the GPS wouldn't connect. I didn't initially drive off right away because I turned so many times to get there I didn't want to get lost on the way back. I could see him walking towards my driver's side window, and now I didn't bother to wait for the GPS. That was enough for me. I know it seems like I'm unfairly judging this guy, but I know you know what I mean when I say that I just got a bad vibe from this dude. Something wasn't right, and I just knew it. I drove away from the house and I could see him standing there watching me drive away. He did this weird wave that just seemed creepy. I started winging it on my way back, and this proved to be a mistake. About 15 minutes later, I was still driving around winding roads with no service at all, and by now I should have hit civilization, but instead, it was just more of nothingness. It was like a maze out there. I pulled over and was trying my best to get a signal or anything, but it was proving to be useless. I was also getting low on gas, and I didn't want to just keep driving. A minute or so later, two huge headlights emerged from the distance. It was one of those huge pickup trucks with those wicked bright lights. The truck pulled up behind me and I made sure that I locked the doors. I was hoping this person might be there to help me, but I also wasn't going to just trust a stranger in the middle of nowhere. The person got closer and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the man that I had just delivered pizza to. He tried doing that stupid sweet-talking thing to me again, but I was very dismissive. He kept insisting on helping, but I told him I was fine. I told him my boss was coming to pick me up, but he didn't seem to believe me. He kept telling me to get out of the car, that he could help me, even though I kept telling him that I didn't need any. He turned around and then started to pace back and forth. He came back over to the car door and was trying to open it now. He felt more aggressive, but still in a calm voice he was asking me to get out of the car. I started to scream and told him to leave me alone, and then his tone changed again. Now he was aggressively trying to open the door. In an annoyed voice he said, "What's wrong with you? I'm trying to help you. It isn't safe here. You should just come with me." Once he started with that aggression, that was it for me. I started my car and floored it. I could see him run to his truck, and he did follow me for a little while, but I dusted him. I must have been driving over 90 miles per hour just trying to get rid of this creep, and I finally got some service and was able to plug the shop address into the GPS. Thankfully, I wasn't too far away. I had made a couple of wrong turns and it took me about 10 minutes out in the sticks somewhere. The owner was so nervous because I had been gone much longer than he thought. He tried calling me and he said he couldn't get through, and I told him about that guy in the delivery and he did not look pleased. He was understanding and made sure that I was okay, and he paid me and told me that I could go home for the night. I asked about calling the police and he told me that he would take care of it and that I had been through enough for one night. I'm not sure why he followed me that evening. I guess there was a small chance that he was trying to help me, but why would he have followed me if he just wanted to help? There would be no reason to follow me. It just doesn't add up in my brain. This was such a weird and unsettling thing that happened to me, and you just never know what people's true intentions are. I've worked in the food and beverage industry for most of my life. It has its pros and cons just like every other industry. I started at a local Italian food and pizza place in my hometown. The restaurant had minimal seating and was mostly used for takeout and delivery. When I was hired, I mainly worked as a delivery person, but also got experience in running the register, stocking the fridge, and helping cook. Most of the aspects of the job are fine, but I really enjoyed delivering. It made the time go by really fast, and sometimes the tips could actually be really good. Every once in a while, on a big order, someone would even give me an extra $20, which back then was a nice chunk of change. The job I hated the most when I wasn't delivering was taking orders and working the counter or cash register. For whatever reason, the people in the store were much ruder than the people ordering over the phone. We also had a few regulars that would hang out and sometimes order stuff and other times just sit around wasting time and then leave. Every so often we would have to kick out belligerent drunks and other times college kids trying to flex their egos and fight while waiting for their slice of pizza. One regular that is still branded into my memory today is a guy named Johnny, who I guess we can just refer to as a regular visitor but not really a customer. I have no idea if Johnny was someone who worked at the restaurant's friend, an old long-standing customer, or just someone looking for a seat and break from the heat. He was routinely both inside and outside the store, asking people passing by for extra money or asking us workers for free and or discounted food items or drinks. He was usually quiet and not overly abrasive, which is why I think the cops were never called. He seemed to be polite and courteous for the most part when interacting with customers. But when one of us girls was working at the register or counter, he was always making crude remarks or sly jokes. I feel like every time I would return from a delivery or have to work the counter, he would try to say some inappropriate joke or ask what my plans were for later in the night. It was usually creepy but harmless, and he never lingered inside for too long, especially if my manager Debbie was working. One night in particular, I got really frustrated with customers, and as the line started to thin out, Johnny approached the counter and asked if I had a boyfriend. I told Debbie, and she immediately let him know that he could buy something or leave. The other managers in similar situations could care less and would claim to be too busy to do anything about it. Again, another reason why I prefer deliveries. They get me out of the store and away from everyone else. One night, I think in August or September, the weather had forecasted some nasty thunderstorms, so per usual, we had a bunch of call-ins. I was running double duty trying to cook and answer the phone for delivery orders. Of course, since it was raining, Johnny was now inside the restaurant sitting in a booth. He was unusually quiet, with no pickup lines or disgusting jokes. He was just sitting there in silence, staring at his hands. I asked Kyle, who was the only other person there, if he could take care of Johnny after his delivery. He said sure and promised to be back soon to try and help out. After a few phone calls, I sat down trying to rest my feet and ankles that were absolutely throbbing. I knew I had to run back to the supply room and fridge to grab a few items for the next order, and I was trying to take a little extra time selfishly so that Kyle would be able to help me when he got back. I headed to the fridge first, grabbed a few things, and then made my way to the storage room where we had all of our non-perishable items. I grabbed what I needed and turned around and absolutely froze in my tracks. Johnny was standing right there. I didn't hear a thing. He was absolutely silent. I tried to ask, "What are you doing back here?" Before I could even get the whole phrase out, Johnny lunged at me. I don't know if he was trying to attack me, assault me, rob me, or kill me. All I remember is that he lunged, and his face looked lifeless. There was no anger or aggression. It was just this blank stare. I could also be misremembering or suppressing things that I saw, but I swear it was like a blank, not on this planet type of look. I quickly dropped the items I had in my hands and struggled away, backing into the storage room and just slamming the door shut. Johnny was pulling at the door trying to open it, but I was able to find the strength to somehow keep it closed. As soon as I thought that he wasn't there, I lodged a broom into the door handle to prevent anyone from getting in. Unless they pulled so hard to shatter the broom, that is. The door started shaking again, and for whatever reason I remained silent. I can still feel the tears rolling down my cheeks, but I wasn't screaming or hysterical. I think I may have been in shock. Then out of nowhere I heard someone say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I heard footsteps and then light knocking on the door. It was Kyle. Everything after that is still a little bit of a blur. I told Kyle everything and we called the police. He sat with me and they helped me relay the story to the police. The owner was called to the store and had to talk to the authorities as well, and Johnny wasn't found that night, at least to my knowledge, but he was banned from the property, meaning that if he ever showed his stupid face again, he would be arrested. I didn't work there for much longer, but thankfully while I was there, I never saw Johnny again. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday night. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit r/letsreadofficial or over email at letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, And remember to ludge your sludge.